All right, everybody. Just want to do a quick overview of how I have my x32 producer from Behringer set up, kind of what my workflow is, how I've routed some of the input faders, what my strategy for the way I routed it was. And I'm not saying that this is the way that it has to be done on this console. I'm just thinking that this is the best way for me, the way that my brain works, coming from a lot of training on a large format analog console with matrices, DCAs with a V, and kind of how when I was first starting out doing this type of stuff, that's where most of my training was. So I kind of still carry that over to the digital age as well. So yeah, let's just basically begin. You can see right now I'm talking through this microphone, and you're noticing, if you're familiar with the way that this desk is set up, there's this bus section up here, and you'll notice that I'm recording this obviously to a USB drive on the console. I guess it's not obvious, but I'm recording my vocal track to the 2-track recorder that's coming off the mains, that's routed from the mains. But this main LR bus is not selected, so that's kind of the first thing we're going to go into. The way that I have my console set up is I'm sending inputs to buses, which are set up as groups. So I have buses 1 through 8 are set up as it typically would be for a pre-fader. It's actually a post-EQ monitor sending feeds to stage wedges and the like, things for the performer to monitor what they're doing. Then I have buses 9 through 12 are set up as groups. You can do this a lot of different ways. From the routing screen, you can set up the configuration of the bus by doing that. I don't have the screen in the screen right now, just because that's not really what the main focus is. It's kind of talking through my workflow. Anyway, excuse me. So we'll just use this track as an example because it's live. So you'll notice that this is, like I said before, is not selected to go to the main left-right bus, but we're still getting a signal. So basically what's happening is this channel is going into this group, which would be like a mixed group, typical to what you might see on a large analog console. You're basically, instead of sending to just the left-right, as it would be kind of default, if you would. I don't know if you are familiar with some analog consoles would have a row of buttons basically down here that you would press to select the send that you're going to, and you can also some of them would have it up on the channel strip, and you could adjust the individual send level of that channel to the whatever auxiliary that you were sending it to. So what's happening is I'm sending that to this bus. In order to send it to the bus, it's kind of an interesting concept. Fader levels on buses that are set up as groups, which are routed to the left and right mix, do not matter. And what I mean by that is when I select my bus that's set up as a group, and then I go to the sends on fader button, which I can do a video a little bit later explaining what that does. But if you're familiar with digital consoles, a lot of the mainstream digital consoles these days will have a sends on fader button, whether it's over here or whether it's over at the other end of your channel, your bank of faders. So when I select that, you'll notice that because it's set up as a group, this volume of this fader doesn't matter. So in order to send the channel signal to the group, you unmute it. Now there's sound again. So the level of the channel that you are assigning to the group doesn't matter, as it would matter for example, like if I were to go over to my monitor mixes, say this is the front of the singer's monitor mix, right? So I'm adjusting levels to suit his or her need, and then when I go back to my sense on faders, then I have my front of house mix. Moral of the story is that doesn't matter for sending to a group. What does matter is that you do not have the left-right bus send selected, because if you do, you're going to get a weird, I don't know if you can hear it, the recording change, but you're going to get a weird kind of, it almost sounds like crosstalk. It's a semi out of phase, falsely augmented sound. What you are going to want sent to the left-right bus is the group. So you can see from what I was hovering over before, this is sent to the left-right bus. Obviously, that's how we're getting the recording. So that's kind of how my input routing goes. Another interesting thing that I do, well, I think it's interesting because I created it. I didn't create it actually. I'm just doing it. I think it's new. What I'm doing is I have so my DCAs are set up, right? So I have where the heck are they? Yeah, so I have my DCAs basically 1 through 4 are mirroring excuse me. They're mirroring the groups. And then I have the other DCAs that are mirroring, or that are being sent from, or that are set up to be sent before they go to the group, if that makes any sense. So it goes a little bit like this. So now so this DCA fader is directly connected to the level of the post group fader. So if I bring that down and up, I'm adjusting the volume of what's happening to the processing of the group of channels, excuse me for bumping the camera, of the group of channels that have been processed in that group. And then if I go over to this channel, or this DCA, sorry, I can then select the channel that I've been talking into, and I can individually control the volume of that channel that's being sent into the group, as I've just done. That's a clever trick that I learned from a gentleman by the name of Dave Ratt. If you don't know him, look him up on YouTube. He has an amazing array of videos on pretty much anything that has to do with pro audio, even recording. His videos on gain structure and setup, EQing rooms and things like that are just very, very intuitive. He explains it in a way that is, to me at least, was something that I've never heard it explained that way before. So it was super, super interesting. That's where I got that idea from. The whole concept of it is that you can adjust. So for example, on this bus, you can't see it on the screen, but on this bus I have an effect inserted that's actually it's like a what the heck's the name of that? It's like a very, I forget the name of it exactly, but there's a compressor on this bus, and it's emulated from a very popular piece of outboard gear, analog outboard gear. So by having the group of channels going into the group on a DCA, and then also the individual group on the DCA, I can change the level of how much compression I'm getting in the group. And then I can also go and change the volume of the group after it's been processed. In this case, it's a compressor. So that's useful for bands that play varying styles of dynamic ranges. So if there's a soft song, you would want less compression to accentuate the dynamic range of the song. If there's a louder song that's pumping kind of the whole time, you're going to want that compression to keep all the dynamics in check. And it's not going to sound weird because you're not going to have a bunch of varying degrees of volume. And some people do things differently. Some compression is a stylistic thing. Mostly, it's used for gain reduction and things like that, and keeping dynamic. An instrument that has a high dynamic range. It's used to keep that instrument in check, like a snare drum, a bass drum, things like that. A vocal that has a tendency to stray or not pull the mic away when they are singing louder, things like that. But having the ability to go in and use one fader to adjust those two parameters is super crucial to me. So that's kind of the main thing that I wanted to convey, is once I've set up all of my routing. So I would go into my bus and I would say, okay, I want, whatever, these channels to go to this bus. And then for this bus, it's just going to be those. And then I have my drum bus, which is like all of these, right? And then I'm also going to go through and I'm going to assign those to DCAs. So I'm going to go over and say, this is my drum DCA, excuse me. And then whatever. So now I have my pre-group volume control on one fader. And then what I can do with this console is I can also put my groups over on the left side right here. So now I have my DCA groups on the right side, and I have my groups, my mix groups on the left side. And what that does to me, a lot of people since the beginning of digital consoles, especially with the early ones like Yamaha 01V, they had a tendency to be notorious for people getting lost in layers, and you have to go through multiple layers to get what your ear mixers, like I work fast. So my ear hears something and I want to change it immediately. With an analog console, it was easy because your hand would immediately jerk up to the channel strip and you can make your adjustments there. With this, it's not as easy unless you have a workflow that works for you. And I'm not saying that this workflow works for everybody, but I'm saying that it works for me. And I just wanted to share that with you guys. So basically, what I would do is I would set my individual mix levels. And I know I forgot to take these channels out of left-right bus, but just for demonstration purposes, I would set my left-right levels. Say we got a kick, snare, tom, overheads, whatever. So I'm setting my mix on here, and ideally I wouldn't want to have to go back to this unless something drastic happened. I want to make macro changes during the show. So then I would be basically mixing on this with these faders as my mixing layer. That way I can make changes to the dynamic range. I have all my DCAs here. If the drums get too loud, I just pull them down a little bit. If the vocals are getting too compressed, if I like my vocal group, say this is my vocal group, right? If I think that the vocal sound is getting too compressed, I can bring down the level of the vocal going into the group, and then I can just bring this up like that, and then I'm getting less. The vocals are hitting the compressor at a lower threshold, therefore the compressor's not kicking in as quickly or as hard, but I'm still maintaining the overall volume that I had before I noticed that they were compressing too much or what have you. So that's what works for me. I want to try to keep this short. It's already been 15 minutes. I tend to ramble on. I'll do a couple more videos just kind of showing you around. This is still a relatively new toy to me. Digital mixers are not a new toy to me, however. When I was working in front of a house at a church, we made a transition from an analog console. I don't even remember. It was a giant 40-channel Yamaha console, and I was really early in my career, if you want to call it that. So I wasn't really super a geared nerd as I am now. But that is what I trained on, and we switched over to Allen & Heath Q32. and I was working on a Q32 for about 2 years, and then about a year and a half, let's call it 2 years before I ended up leaving, we upgraded our system. Sticking with Allen Heath, went up to a SQ7, and the SQ7 is an absolutely beautiful console to mix on. That whole SQ line is, the workflow that mixer comes out of the box with is brilliant. There's a reason why Allen and Heath is very much so a leader in the digital mixing world these days. And not to mention the sound that it makes. It's incredibly high fidelity, 96 kilohertz operating frequency. It's fantastic. I'm not saying anything bad about this console, but as with any piece of gear, you do get what you pay for. So this is what I would consider a budget digital mixer, and that's what it's not to say that this doesn't have the features that the other mixers have. It's just, it takes a little bit of time to go through it, and I've definitely understood that as I was making the transition from the Allen and Heath console to this. There's a big difference, and you notice it, and it makes you very, very fortunate to realize maybe when you have the funds to afford a nicer mixer like an Allen and Heath, that it makes you appreciate kind of what you have, So there I went rambling for another minute and a half. We're going to cut it there, and maybe we'll see you guys again. Thank you.